What's up, guys? Hey, have you ever thought about how many times a day we switch things on and off? Like the lights, your alarm, your hairdryer, your phone, the TV. In fact, yesterday I tried to count how many times I flipped a switch of some kind, but I had already lost track at like 10 a.m. It's so hard to do. You should try it sometime.
We're pretty reliant on the on-off switches in our lives, and when they don't work, when we can't turn something on or off when we really need to, it can drive us pretty nuts, right? When I went to college, I had gotten this brand new alarm clock for graduation. It was awesome. It was an alarm, a radio, and even a CD player, and that was like state of the art back then. So I had to move into my dorm with my roommate and had to put my alarm clock across the room on my chest of drawers. I thought it was a brilliant idea. I didn't have my parents anymore to make sure I got up and made it to class, so this way it would force me to get out of bed and shut the alarm off. The first day of class came and I heard the alarm go off. And I heard the alarm go off. And I heard the alarm go off. And then I heard a loud explosion as my roommate picked up the alarm clock and threw it against the wall. After I got a new alarm clock, I moved it next to my bed so that I could just switch it off when I didn't want to get up. Whew, it was my first lesson of college.
I know I'm not the only one. I think to some degree, we all know what it's like to struggle with flipping that switch on sometimes. And I'm not just talking about alarm clocks or televisions anymore. I'm also talking about our faith. Because sometimes it feels really hard to keep our faith turned on all the time. And by faith, I'm simply talking about our ability to believe in and trust in God.
We all have a certain amount of faith. All of us, regardless of whether you're a new Christian or if you grew up having a relationship with God, have some level of faith, however small it may be. But there are always going to be things we experience that make it difficult for us to have faith in God. Difficult to believe, difficult to trust. Sometimes those things can be so big and so powerful that they actually turn off our faith, like a switch.
So if there's a question we can't answer, our faith is switched off.
If there's a prayer that doesn't get answered, and our faith is switched off.
We're all going to experience moments like this. We'll all encounter hard questions we can't answer. We'll all ask God for things that we never receive. We'll all make bad decisions that fill us with guilt.
But what if those moments don't have to switch off our faith? What if God could use those moments to make our faith even stronger? To switch on our faith in ways that we never thought possible? To transform those difficult experiences into moments that help our faith grow and change and become something more than it was before? And for the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at things that can switch your faith on in brand new ways.
It can probably be argued that one of the best examples of a person who had their faith in God switched on was a man named Peter. As one of Jesus' 12 disciples, Peter was one of 3 disciples who had the closest relationship with Jesus. Peter loved Jesus. And after Jesus went back to heaven following his resurrection, Peter was one of the great leaders in the early church. He told people everywhere about Jesus, and he did so knowing it could cost him his life. Peter is remembered as a man who was bold and had great faith. But here's what's interesting. Peter's faith wasn't always so big or great.
Luke, one of Jesus' other disciples and Peter's friend, recounts for us a story that demonstrates how little faith Peter actually had at one point in his life. In this story, Jesus had been arrested and was about to be put on trial for his life. Because they had followed Jesus, all of Jesus' disciples were afraid for their own lives. After Jesus was arrested, Peter followed Jesus to find out where he had been taken. But Peter was so scared that he hid himself in the crowd. And Luke tells us that a little girl saw Peter and recognized him.
A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. A little girl's question scared Peter so much that he denied ever knowing Jesus at all. In this moment, Peter's faith didn't switch on at all. He was scared to death and didn't trust God to take care of him. But then it got even worse for Peter. 2 more people came up in the crowd and asked him if he knew Jesus. 2 more times, Peter denied even knowing Jesus.
Can you imagine denying or betraying one of your closest friends? I mean, how would you feel afterwards? Well, Luke tells us exactly how Peter felt. He felt horrible. He felt guilty. And after Peter denied Jesus, Jesus looked straight at him. I mean, can you imagine being Peter in that moment? Can you imagine, after all of his fear, his circumstances, and his poor decisions, how easy it would have been for his faith to just switch off completely? But listen to what Peter did next.
He went outside and wept bitterly. This story doesn't paint a picture of a man of great faith. This seems to tell the story of a man who did something wrong, who failed in a big way over and over and over again. 3 times, in fact. Imagine what Peter must have feared, that perhaps Jesus didn't like him anymore, that his supposed faith in God had all been a sham, and that maybe Jesus could never use him again.
My guess is that none of us have been in a situation exactly like Peter's, but we've all been in positions where we did something wrong, maybe even repeatedly. And like Peter, we've maybe even feared that God couldn't use us ever again. Maybe you've been struggling with that same sin over and over again.
Maybe you feel guilty about the way you consistently say hurtful things to your family.
Maybe you need to be more generous.
Maybe you continue to look at things online you shouldn't be looking at. You know it's wrong. You hate how it makes you feel, but you can't seem to stop.
And maybe you've even thought something along these lines. I know God loves me, but I've messed up so badly, He'll never do anything great through me. Maybe you believe that your failures have switched off your faith.
Maybe you're afraid that because of what you've done, your faith is simply stuck where it is. I think Peter gets that. I wonder if Peter worried that God would still use him to do great things. But as we talked about earlier, Peter is known today all over the world as a man of great faith. So how did Peter go from being scared, guilt-ridden, and faithless to being bold, brave, and one of the greatest men of faith the world has ever known? What changed? What switched on his faith? It was a truth he learned in a conversation he had with Jesus.
After Jesus' resurrection, he made a point to ask Peter a question. When they'd finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs."
In other words, Peter, I know that you love me, and I need you to get in the game. I've got big things for you to do. Jesus, in that moment, wanted Peter to know that despite his mistakes, despite his sin, and despite his guilt, he had big things for him to do.
Peter saw that Jesus was offering him a second chance. And not just a second chance, but a third, a fourth, and a fifth. Jesus was offering Peter exactly what he needed: grace. He got something he didn't deserve. And when Peter realized that his mistakes didn't disqualify him from being used by God, it strengthened his faith.
God switched on Peter's faith when Peter let God switch his guilt to grace.
Jesus poured grace into Peter's faith, and it bubbled up, spilled over, and literally changed the world.
And the same thing can happen for you. If you feel guilty, if you feel like a mess up, and if you feel like God could never use you, do what Peter did. Let God switch your guilt to grace.
All of us, just like Peter, can have a difficult time believing in God's grace. It's far easier to believe that God is mad at us and done with us forever. But if you want to switch on your faith in a new way, you've got to believe in God's grace. Because it's His grace that allows us to believe that no matter what we've done, God is never done.
Let Peter's example give you hope. When you mess up big, Jesus forgives big. Jesus never runs out of second chances.